You know, I really hate cocktail parties. And it's not that I don't like drinking. I'm not averse to a drink or two. And I can't blame it entirely on this kind of stubborn streak of introversion that I have. The worst thing about a cocktail party is at some point, somebody's going to walk up to you and pop the question, the dreaded, "So what do you do?" I kind of stand there, kind of hem and haw. Well, it's sort of like this, and have you heard of that? And I grasp, trying to find some frame of reference, some way of explaining it. And I usually just make it sound quite complicated and not that interesting, and try and just get it over with, and kind of regret the day that I didn't follow the path of being a doctor, a lawyer, a journalist, or something that when you say it, people know what it is. But then, I think if I look a bit deeper, if I think a little bit more about why I'm uncomfortable with talking about what I do, I think part of it comes down to the sort of, I don't know if it's necessarily the sordid truth, but the truth in the transaction that really goes on between the people who are hiring me or my company to do something. Because often what they're asking us to do is predict the future, or at least that little slice of the future that they think is going to be very relevant to them. And that's not really a conversation I want to get into at a cocktail party. But the reason it boils down to this is that, you know, it turns out in design, in new product development, and innovation, it's almost never about having good ideas or even great ideas. The success is always resting on having the right idea at the right time, which means that our business really centers on the question of time. And we spend a lot of time thinking about time and talking about time and arguing about it and writing about it and thinking about it again. And we also think that time is a central question of emergence, possibly the central question of emergence, which might come to a surprise to those who think about emergence from the context of economics or philosophy or psychology or sociology, because those communities generally look at the central question of emergence as being around the source of emergence. Where does it come from? How does it come from? Is it a macro thing or a micro thing? Is it from the chaos of the system, as Jamie was talking about earlier? So we spend all this time trying to figure out kind of where things emerge from and how they emerge. But we think that if we think about time a little bit differently, if we shift our sense of time, we can think about emergence differently and perhaps create some new types of cultural magic in the process. Now, I love to read. I read voraciously. And a client recently recommended a book to me. And you know, I'm not necessarily a discerning reader. I just like a lot of it. So it kind of worked its way up to the top of the pile, and recently read a book called The Fourth Turning, which I don't know if you've heard of it. It's by Strauss and Howe. And if you look at the copyright, it was published in 1998. Which explains a lot of the kind of messianic zeal you find inside the book. Because as we were kind of looking at the new millennium, we were all a bit crazy on the idea of time, weren't we? It's chock-block full of useful and interesting tidbits. For example, they warned us to expect a global crisis sometime around 2005. You should also know that that should be over by about 2026. So pencil that into your calendar, at which time we will enter the next awakening phase. So yeah, there's lots of interesting things in the book. But the most useful thing for this conversation is they talk about our different senses of time. How do we think about time in different ways? And so first they talk about chaotic time, right? This is basically the shit happens model of time. It's random, it's unpredictable, you don't know where it's coming from, you don't know what's going to happen next, it's just chaos. Then there's the model of linear time. Right? This is the modern progression. This is, you know, our lives as narrative with, you know, as a story at the beginning, a middle, and an end. And actually just moving forward is progress. As long as you keep moving forward, it's going to get better. And actually some days that's enough, isn't it? You just keep putting one step in front of the other and you do progress. Now their favorite model of time or sense of time is cyclical time. You can kind of think of this as the great roundabout of time, which is a transplant to the UK. I quite like roundabouts because I can get in the middle and go around lots of times before I get oriented. I'm not quite as good at getting off, It's that kind of natural drifting thing that I don't quite have mastered. But my dangerous driving aside, cyclical time is all about just wait 20 years, because you're going to move on to the next phase, and then the next phase, and the next phase. And you can predict these phases, because they're just going to keep coming around again for millennia, and on and on. But we've got a fourth kind of sense of time that we like to use. And one of the things I really like about this sense of time is that all of my semiotician colleagues back at the office really get into this sense of time. But my mathematician husband also really likes it. I can never get these two groups of people to agree. So when they agree on something, I know, okay, maybe this is useful. I should consider it. So in this collapsed sense of time, right, the past, the present, and the future all exist at the same time. They're all part of now. And so now shifts from being a fleeting reactive point in time to being a rich bundle of reflections on the past and things we anticipate about the future. Now moves from being a definition to a filter. Now, it's an important sentence, but I know that's not going to work very well post-lunch in terms of thinking of time moving from a definition to a filter. So let's think about it a bit more from perspectives of popular culture. Sunday afternoon, I probably really should have spent my time preparing for this presentation. But instead, my 11-year-old son begged me to take him to the movies. And if you have an adolescent child or a pre-adolescent child, you can probably guess what we went to see. Right? We went to see The Hunger Games. And it turned out to be a pretty good use of my time in relation to this presentation. If you're not familiar with the story, or if you've read the reviews about the media and the books and the movies and the franchise, every single discussion of the book starts with, this is a dystopian story, right? And I think it's kind of cool that they've gotten all of the popular press to use a word of 4 syllables or more. But dystopia is an interesting concept to think of in contrast to that kind of linear sense of time we talked about, right? Because modernity assumes kind of progressive utopia. It's all going to get better over time. We're on this story of progression. But we have this whole body of literature and film, some of it great, some of it not so great, which is all about kind of regressive dystopia, right? Over time, we're actually moving backwards to less enlightened systems and less progressive times. Sort of as you kind of move forward, you're going backwards. So clearly, there's a part of our culture that needs to play with the concept of progression and linearity. But this movie also does a very good job, much better than the book, I have to say, of illustrating this point about the past, the present, and the future living together as contemporaneous resources. So the hero and the heroine come from District 12. District 12 in the movie is a perfect replica of Depression-era Appalachia. Now, I come from rural Pennsylvania in the mountains that kind of end Appalachia. I know Heather here is familiar with the region as well. So it's not necessarily as far in our past as other people may feel that this is in their past. But in the movie, they replicate down to the coal beneath their fingertips, the shacks they live in. Even the pictures on the mantelpiece are black and white, right? Even though they're living in the present or in the future. And although you see the hardship and the deprivation and how very difficult their lives are, you can't help but feel this pull of nostalgia for a time that we never experienced, but that we believe is somehow about kind of simpler people in simpler times, dealing with tough conditions but making the best of it. And it has a certain nostalgic charm in terms of this being something we can get our heads around. This is contrasted to the capital. In the capital is populated by 2 types of people. They're basically the criminally naive and the criminally evil. And they walk around in these grotesque fashions with extreme body modifications. There's all this hyper-surveillance, augmented reality, and then they've got these bullet trains that go through the countryside at 200 miles per hour. You think, wait, is that the imagined future we're talking about? But I think you get my point. In movies and books, we're willing to accept this idea of kind of past, present, and futures living together. So what can we achieve if we start to use these resources in our daily lives and in our work? Actually, I won't go there quite yet. Make sure I don't miss something important. Yes, because although the future does hold many possibilities, and we know this, and we know that in our present, we can sort of choose from possible actions in front of us and affect our future, right? So there's a sense that we maybe can't predict the future, but we can start to influence it. We do have some choice in what our futures are like by what we do or don't do. Popular culture says, well, you can't change the past. That's water under the bridge. Once it's gone, it's done. But that's not really true either, is it? If you've ever put together a photo album, you choose which pictures go in it. And you're probably going to leave out the ones that don't show you in quite a flattering light as you'd like. Or in a more kind of contemporary interpretation, when you're editing your new Facebook timeline, you're not putting everything in there, are you? You're selecting the parts of your past that you want to represent you and your personal identity. And so, of course, we're choosing and we're changing our past. And it becomes a sort of a sense of expression and a tool for us to move forward with. But I think the point here is that when we choose to go into deeper discarded parts of history, things that maybe we're not accessing as often, it actually gives us the opportunity to reshape contemporary reality. You can begin to create a unique present moment for ourselves. So there's a lot of richness back there. And I'm not here to sort of reject modernity or contemporary life, or to say we should all go back to living with the Amish or run for the hills, or even that contemporary capitalist structures are going to collapse. The only thing I'm here to question is whether emergence is purely about the modern, about modernity, about the new. Because if you look at the statement that frames this entire day, right, you have at the end, but if there's one thing emergence is, it is forward-looking. So I'm just here to question whether emergence is only about being forward-looking. The rhetoric of science, the way we talk about science and the production of knowledge, is all based on this story of modern progression, right? So we all put together our little building blocks of knowledge, and we pile one on top of the other, and we get to something. We achieve something. But we know that science doesn't actually happen this way, right? Kuhn clearly established that, when progress, big progress happens in science, it happens because of discontinuous shifts in paradigm, right? The progress isn't coming from moving forward down this path that everybody's projected. It's coming from the side somewhere. We don't actually move forward by moving forward. We move forward by moving to the side, backwards, inside out, upside down. And so when we sort of focus purely on novelty, newness, and that type of progression as the way of making knowledge, we forget the production of anything, including knowledge, is about making meaning. The new doesn't make sense without an understanding of the past. And as things get even faster, as culture is speeding by more and more, and we get that sense that it's getting more complicated, we actually realize that things are lapsing faster and faster as well. We miss things more because they're kind of speeding past at a faster pace. And so we have to move that on. Go back to pop culture, because we're getting down in the depths a bit. So consider the character Samuel L. Jackson, Pulp Fiction, right? You can't see it in this picture quite so well, but you've got the jerry curl from the 80s, you've got the jazz suit from the 50s, you've got the speech patterns of the 60s civil rights movement, and he's driving a car from the 70s, right? And what year is this? 1994 it was. And Quentin Tarantino was making a film for a widespread audience. He wasn't trying to demonstrate his brilliance at postmodern bricolage. He was trying to entertain people, right? But the overall effect is one of time play. It helps us realize that both the past and the present and the future hold these rich, expressive possibilities for us. And they're not just expressive possibilities open to media and to film, they're possibilities open to us as designers and innovators. As we create new presents and as we predict the future. Sort of brings me back to my job description problem, right? Am I here to predict the future, or am I here to make the future? Emergence has to be talked into being, right? So it doesn't matter who notices something, whether it's an academic or a trend hunter, the Twitterati, or the guy on the street. You notice something and you give it a name, and that's when it becomes real, right? So you start talking about it, and that's when it emerges. That's when it exists. And we don't yet have windows in our homes that tell us what the weather is going to be like later today. And we don't yet have refrigerators that tell us when the milk is going to expire. And I certainly don't yet have my Star Trek communicator or replicator or transporter. But we believe those will exist, right? Those visions of the future are actually in our past now. They're no longer disruptive or innovative or emergent, right? If the future cannot surprise us, where's the magic? What's left for us to sell is kind of surprise and innovation. Not to go there yet either. I think that getting to the next type of emergence, this next type of surprise, clearly the answer isn't going back to a linear process, right? Just kind of slavish adherence to following the steps doesn't take you to anywhere new or surprising. And it also assumes that our behaviors and our desires are driven by a set of needs that in some cases really don't exist anymore, or the needs that are driving our behaviors aren't the ones that business is really happy to talk about. But is there an alternative? What does the alternative look like? I think, the alternative is certainly messier than a process. It's not as random as chaos. It's not as predictable as a cycle. And it's quite contradictory. So it's a lot like people themselves, really, in that respect. Because we are always searching for the new, the next thing, because we believe the next thing is going to be better, we're constantly consuming novelty. We spend so much time consuming novelty that we don't have any time to master complexity. And we get this sort of idea fatigue. We're so busy looking for the next technology, the next media, the next idea, that I don't know about you, but some mornings I wake up and think about looking at my Twitter stream more with dread than anticipation. What more do I have to learn about? What more do I have to follow? Even conferences like this turn into less about kind of ideas worth spreading and more about the idea I should vaguely know about so I don't keep falling further behind. So what happens if we just flip the equation a bit? What if we say, well, yes, time is a central question of emergence, but maybe time isn't the answer to emergence? So if right now we're looking for the newest thing because new equals better, what if we stop looking for the new and just start looking for the better? The past is now, the present is now, the future is now. They're all pushing and pulling on us simultaneously. And so, like any great story, it has a beginning and a middle and an end, just not necessarily in that order. Thanks.